Bilzerian, a name that became synonymous with excess, adventure, and controversy. To millions scrolling through Instagram, he wasn't just a man, he was a lifestyle. The guns, the girls, the private jets, the poker tables, all blended into a larger-than-life fantasy that seemed ripped straight from a movie. His feed was chaos and luxury combined, a never-ending highlight reel of adrenaline and temptation. He called himself the King of Instagram, and for years, the internet believed it. But behind the filters and flashy posts, critics claimed the truth was far less glamorous. They said Dan Bilzerian wasn't a self-made millionaire at all, but a carefully constructed illusion built on smoke, mirrors, and old money. So how real was his fortune? And how much of it was just clever marketing dressed up as masculinity and success? Before we dive deeper, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we're pulling back the curtain on one of the wildest modern myths, the rise and fall of Dan Bilzerian. Our story begins in Tampa, Florida, in 1980. Daniel Brandon Bilzerian was born into a world of privilege and contradictions. His father, Paul Bilzerian, wasn't your average businessman. He was one of Wall Street's most notorious corporate raiders during the 1980s. Paul built a $100 million empire by buying struggling companies, restructuring them, and selling off their assets for profit. It was ruthless, but it worked until it didn't. In 1989, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Paul Bilzerian with securities fraud, accusing him of manipulating stock prices for personal gain. He was convicted and ordered to repay over $60 million, but instead of doing so, he filed for bankruptcy not once, but twice. Investigators spent years chasing the missing money, convinced that Paul had hidden large portions of his fortune in secret accounts and family trusts. Dan was just a kid when all this happened, but the impact was lifelong. He saw firsthand how wealth could vanish overnight and how image could still carry power even when the money was gone. It's no coincidence that Dan would later build his entire identity around looking rich, powerful, and untouchable. Growing up, Dan wasn't exactly a model student. He was rebellious, impulsive, and constantly in trouble. He bounced from one school to another, often kicked out for fighting or pulling pranks that went too far. But underneath all that chaos was a restless energy, a need to stand out, to be seen as something more than the son of a disgraced businessman. After high school, he tried to reinvent himself. He joined the Navy and began SEAL training, one of the toughest military programs in the world. He endured weeks of physical and mental punishment that would break most men. But just before graduation, he was dropped from the program, reportedly for a safety violation involving a gun. Though he never earned the SEAL trident, he left with something else. The image of a survivor, a man who'd faced hell and lived to tell about it. That reputation for toughness would later become the backbone of his personal brand. In the mid-2000s, Dan emerged in the high-stakes poker scene. He claimed he had turned a few $1,000s into millions by outsmarting billionaires and celebrities in private games. In interviews, he spoke of legendary nights winning $50 million one year, losing $3 million in a single sitting. The stories were wild, cinematic, and impossible to verify. Because when reporters and professional players started digging, things didn't add up. Dan's name was missing from official tournament rankings, and no one could find proof of the massive wins he boasted about. Many insiders believed his fortune didn't come from poker at all, but from money tucked away in family trusts connected to his father's old wealth. Still, poker gave Dan something money couldn't buy: an origin story. He became the modern outlaw gambler, a reckless genius who played by his own rules. And when social media exploded, that story turned into gold. By 2013, Dan Bilzerian had cracked the code to online fame long before most influencers even knew it existed. He didn't just post about his life, he turned it into a full-blown performance. His Instagram wasn't a glimpse into reality, it was a movie where every scene screamed excess. One moment he'd be boarding a private jet surrounded by a dozen models, and the next he'd be blasting machine guns in the desert or lounging on a yacht with stacks of cash. It was chaos, luxury, and ego all rolled into one. People couldn't look away. For men, he represented the ultimate fantasy, a life without rules, without limits. For women, he was a symbol of status and danger, the guy everyone wanted to be near. Brands saw opportunity, eager to attach themselves to his larger-than-life persona. Bilzerian wasn't just living the dream, he was selling it, turning envy into influence and attention into currency. His feed became a blueprint for digital excess, and soon, major magazines like GQ and Forbes were hailing him as the king of Instagram, the man who turned social media into his personal playground. But as his following exploded, so did the questions. Where was the money really coming from? In 2017, Bilzerian decided to transform his image into a business. He launched Ignite, a luxury cannabis and lifestyle brand built entirely around his personal identity. The company promised premium products and an aspirational lifestyle for fans who wanted to live like Dan. On paper, it looked like a brilliant move. In practice, it became a financial disaster. Public filings later revealed that Ignite was burning through millions, not on production or marketing campaigns, but on extravagant personal expenses. Private jets, mansion rentals, yacht parties, and high-end trips were listed as company business costs. Former employees alleged that Ignite wasn't selling a lifestyle, it was funding one. One lawsuit even accused Bilzerian of using company money to maintain his Playboy image, from luxurious getaways to real estate purchases. By 2020, the company had lost tens of millions of dollars, its stock price had crashed, and investors were demanding answers. But on Instagram, none of that existed. Dan was still posting the same fantasy, still surrounded by models, still living large. In the digital world, his empire looked untouched. That's what made his story so fascinating. In Dan Bilzerian's universe, perception was reality. As long as the photos looked good, the truth didn't matter. But even illusions fade with time. As the years passed, the parties slowed down. His posts became less frequent. In 2021, he released a memoir called The Setup, filled with stories of poker nights, wild parties, and personal philosophy, part brag, part reflection. It was his attempt to reclaim relevance. But the internet had changed. Audiences no longer worshipped unattainable luxury. The rise of relatable influencers, authentic creators, and content built on value made Dan's brand of excess look outdated. The social media king who once symbolized freedom now seemed trapped in a fantasy that no one was buying anymore. He tried to pivot, posting about meditation, business, and even politics, but the spark was gone. The illusion had cracked. The man who once ruled Instagram had become a relic of a different era. Still, his influence can't be denied. For nearly a decade, Dan Bilzerian represented something millions secretly wanted: a life without limits, rules, or consequences. He wasn't selling wealth, he was selling rebellion. The idea that you could break away from the 9-to-5 grind, reject mediocrity, and build your own kingdom. It's the same fantasy later influencers like Andrew Tate would build entire empires around: the promise that dominance, confidence, and luxury are proof of success. But that mindset comes with a price. Because once your identity is built on image, you can't stop performing. You have to keep feeding the illusion, even when it's crumbling from the inside. Today, Dan Bilzerian claims to be living quietly in Las Vegas, semi-retired and focusing on new ventures. But questions about his true wealth haven't disappeared. Some sources insist that his fortune came from his father's hidden assets rather than poker winnings. Others point to Ignite's collapse as proof that the Playboy lifestyle was never sustainable. Whatever the truth is, one thing's clear: Dan Bilzerian mastered the psychology of envy. He understood that in the age of social media, being believable is more important than being real. Every outrageous photo, every story, every headline, all part of a masterclass in illusion. He blurred the line between authenticity and performance so effectively that people forgot there was a difference. And that's what made his empire work for a while. In a world where fame is currency and attention equals power, Dan Bilzerian built one of the most successful modern myths. He showed how the internet rewards the bold, the controversial, and the exaggerated. He proved that you don't need to be truly rich, just rich enough to make people believe it. Whether you see him as a fraud or a genius, Bilzerian changed the game. He made fantasy profitable and turned social media into a stage for his own legend. His story is a mirror reflecting our culture, one obsessed with appearance, validation, and the endless chase for more. Dan Bilzerian didn't just live the Playboy dream. He engineered it, sold it, and made millions believe it. And for almost a decade, the world played along. Because in the end, the internet runs on illusion, and Dan Bilzerian understood that better than anyone else. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the blurred lines between power, money, and manipulation, make sure to hit that subscribe button because next time, we're uncovering another modern empire built on fantasy and fame.